Calumet Editions, an eclectic publisher of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, introduced a new business model nearly a decade ago, in which the publisher and author work as equal partners in a joint venture. Their stable of authors have won numerous and prestigious prizes across literary forms. Where traditional publishers fail to see the value in projects, Calumet cooperates with his authors in realizing a book's potential.
And welcome to Writer's Corner. We have an unusual situation here. We've had all sorts of duets, but we've never had a writer and his daughter. We've never had two relatives that close. We've had a husband and wife, but they were on different House Wright and Renee Valois.
Yes.
But so welcome to the two of you. I'll introduce our guests. We have an award winner who has had much recognition, known as an environmentalist, and then there's her father.
I was like, which one are you talking about?
Ashley Shelton, welcome.
Thank you so
and
much.
Don Shelby, who is a legend in his own time.
In his own mind.
In his own mind. I don't know where to start, with so many awards, so instant recognition all over the state and basically all over the country. But you became a writer.
Yes.
What was your inspiration, and what is it like living with a legend?
Well, I won't tell you how old I am, but I will say that I am still waiting for the day that I am not Don Shelby's daughter in Minnesota. He's Ashley Shelby's dad.
Oh.
I may be waiting a long time, but I actually started as a journalist, obvious reasons, and I did not have the right temperament, I would say. I am more of an introvert, and it takes a certain extroversion to be able to talk to people every day, interview them, sometimes at their worst moments. And I wrote a book that was a work of narrative journalism that required a ton of interviews. It was the story of the 1997 Grand Forks flood.
Red River
Rising. And it required a lot of interviews of people whose wounds were still raw. I was 22 when I was reporting that story, at 23, and it taught me a great deal about empathy, about storytelling, about what it means to have built a life and then see that life literally washed away in some cases. I remember telling my dad, these phone calls are really difficult to make, some of these phone calls. And he said, well, why don't you think of it this way? You're not Ashley Shelby, nervous person calling up someone. You are Ashley Shelby, journalist. Just inhabit that persona for as long as the interview is, and you'll be surprised at how much easier it is. And it was absolutely great advice. That is what I did, and that's how I got through a lot of interviews. But the more you do it, the more you realize people just want to tell their stories. They even forget you're there sometimes. They just want to have been asked.
If you're going to get advice from anybody, it's going to be from Don Shelby.
Yep.
There's a theme in her work, because journalism was first before fiction, before this sort of narrative fiction. Sometimes this particular stuff is called climate fiction, like science fiction. But her next piece of, I think, really serious journalism appeared in The Nation, and it was coverage of the Exxon Valdez oil spill in Alaska 10 years afterwards. And it also required that face-to-face confrontation with people who had lost everything. And so it doesn't surprise me that, given her temperament, that kind of pain is absorbed by the person who is reporting the story. That's little known.
So often, yes.
Yeah, even for a person who spent 60 years as a journalist. I carry the pain of the people that I am interviewing. So she's much more tender than I am, and so she chose the right path.
But interestingly enough, you also do some humor.
Right.
You do fiction and nonfiction. You are an environmentalist. Not that your dad is not.
Oh, no, he is.
Bees and trees,
Bees and trees.
if that's a fair statement.
Yes.
So it's really interesting. But growing up, did you have really the impetus because your father is Don Shelby, or was this just something that was within you?
Probably a little bit of both. We were a household of books. Our first home was in Linden Hills in Minneapolis, and we had built-in bookcases. And I believe you built them. It was
Similar to this bookcase here.
Yes. Lovely too, by the way.
Yes.
He had them completely filled with books, and what I remember so clearly, one of the most salient images of my childhood, was him on the couch reading a book after the 10 p.m. news. He'd come home, I would often still be up, and he would, get something to drink, get something to eat, and then lay out on the couch, and he had a different book, every couple days. And so I always, in my mind's eye, that's how I remember him. And I think that absolutely, I absorbed that image, and I also read a great deal as a child, and that just continued on. It becomes a habit. So that would probably be a very big influence on, what I ended up doing, because the more books you read, if you're interested in writing, the better writer you become, because you are absorbing all of these different styles, all of these different approaches, and sort of an amalgam of that becomes your voice as a writer on the page.
I remember one thing, Alan, she came home, she was in, I think she was in grade school, maybe 6th grade. And I said, let me see your reading list that has been assigned to you by the teacher in English. And I looked at it, and then I made my own list, another 20 books, because that didn't seem sufficient to me.
Right.
That seemed to be the baseline. You get these classics. Well, what about these? And one day, she had written a composition and brought it to me to look at. And I disguised my shock, but the shock was this. I'd written probably 5 million words in my life, not as a novelist, but
as a journalist, certainly an investigative journalist.
And I read this thing, and she was 12, and I went, she's a better writer than I am. And that was a shock, and I knew what path she was going to be on. And so I looked at the story that she had written, and I'd asked her to read Melville, Twain, Dickens, and one other writer. And I said, now take this story you wrote and write that story that you wrote in their style, Hemingway. And so she had to write the same story she wrote, but it sounded like Hemingway, and then write the same story and sound like Dickens, and write the same story, and on, and she did it perfectly.
Very interesting technique, though.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anybody who did it that way, and it's very clever and very interesting. And you are an author also. Let's talk about your book.
It is a result of her. I had been a columnist writing about basketball for a newspaper that went out to people who were aficionados of basketball in the state of Minnesota.
And you were actually a basketball player
I
of
was,
note
in fact, yeah.
Yes.
a couple of years ago.
And it was, and the newspaper was called the Full Court Press, which I thought was great. And I knew the publisher and editor, and he asked me to write some columns. Well, what I thought of is I'm going to write stories about how basketball is a reflection of life, and little vignettes, little stories. And they just set, they were one-offs. She liked them so much that she went down, and she can tell the story, but she collected all of them and retyped them all. Tell the story.
Well, first you have to know that he's an Indiana basketball player. He was born in Muncie. That's very important. Anybody who might be watching who knows basketball will understand that completely. It's a different type of basketball and a different type of obsession. But it was also a different type of childhood in Indiana if you were playing basketball and who wasn't playing basketball. So those stories have a wholesomeness about them, and they all have a sort of lesson or principle that the story embodies. It's very moving a lot of times. It's also funny other times. And folks can see themselves reflected in the stories, not just basketball players. And I kind of knew that, but it had been a long time since he had written these. I think the 93 maybe you stopped writing them?
Yeah.
We had a handful of them, but I thought, we should collect these and put them in a book. I didn't know where to find the archives. I remember trying to get in touch with Kevin Mulder, the publisher. I ended up going down to the Hennepin County Public Library, the Central Library in Minneapolis, because they had an archive of the Full Court Press, because it was an important Minnesota newspaper. So I couldn't take them to photocopy. I had to type them all out by hand. But it brings me back to sort of the Hemingway example, where the act of typing someone else's words in an interesting way allows you to sort of inhabit their perspective in a way that you can't when you're just reading them. And I kind of relived a lot of my childhood, the stories that my dad would tell us about his upbringing in Indiana as I wrote them. The other thing as an editor, what I could do was, as I wrote them, say, this one belongs, this one we won't include, these two should be together, and you start to see the arc of the collection of what are essentially a bunch of columns. But I think now it's called The Season Never Ends. I guess I should say the title. They read as, together they read as a complete little book. It's short, easy read. The children have written to you and told you that they love it. Church groups buy it in bulk. It's a wonderful book about more than just basketball. It's about life.
The Season Never Ends is still available.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess you can get it on Amazon if nothing else.
Right.
And
I've gotten letters from NBA players who read the book when they were younger. I got one letter from a coach whose name I'll not mention, but he was in Rochester. And it was a very fulsome letter, but it said basically that he had been coaching for 30 years and decided that he was going to quit, even though they had offered him a contract. He read the book and then signed a 5-year contract to continue coaching after reading the book, because it reminded him of what the reason and the material focus of the game of basketball and its influence on a person's life can actually have inspiration. Thank you.
I think it's encapsulated by one of my favorite lines that I think has informed my life. I like to think it's informed my life, which is, he wrote, an assist is the best statistic. It's not about you. You're helping someone else out. Those are the type of lessons that are in the book, where you're tying basketball to the everyday principles of a life well lived.
And it's found an interesting audience among churches who have found messages of inspiration inside the stories that are essentially about basketball. That's the theme. But there are real life conditions and choices that had to be made, and ways of living your life, and ways people expect you to appear as a member of a team. one of the rules that concludes the book is you can't inbound the ball to yourself. You need someone in your life that you trust. You need a team. You need to be interdependent. But enough about me. That's it was a one-off. I have some screenplays in my head. I've got maybe a book on journalism in my head. Maybe if I live long enough, I'll write those.
Religion has been important to you?
Faith.
Faith.
Yeah.
As opposed to religion.
An organized religion.
Yeah.
Yes, dogma.
Yeah.
Dogma, I don't want to offend anyone, but a dogma of religion stops the creative thinking process. You just accept what someone tells you is, rather than question it and expand on it, go further with it. So faith, not religion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I go along with there. We could have several programs on that.
Yes.
Faith certainly would be important in the time that we're living now.
Wow.
Wow is right. Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, you have been associated with a program we called Access to Democracy.
Yes.
It's in its 27th year right now. I started it in '99. I no longer participate in it. Sharon, my wife, Bill Raker, who's peering at us through the window, and Steve Francisco are handling it very, very well in its 27th year. But for our 20th anniversary, we had on the Access to Democracy a rather large gathering of people who had been guests, and the host was Don Shelby. Next thing you know, Tempest Fugits, 25th anniversary, we had another program with a lot of other guests, and the host graciously, once again, Don Shelby. Now, strictly by accident, today happens to be the 3rd year of Writer's Corner.
Wonderful.
Kismet.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Great run.
At my age, anything really. So tell us about this book.
This quirky, unusual
Honeymoons
book. Yeah.
and
Temporary
temporary
locations.
locations.
Yes.
Bit of a mouthful. Gosh, well, it's a collection of short climate fiction, but it's not as straightforward as maybe other collections might be. I think saying it's experimental would be taking it a little bit too far, but it has a mix of your standard and traditional short stories. It has a novelette length story to open, and then it has found documents. So one of the stories might be a menu. One might be a podcast transcript, a pharmaceutical marketing document. These are all stories that have to do with how we are processing our changing world, and not just changing naturally, changing because of the actions of, I will say, a small group of individuals. And I say that because we have been fed a lie that climate change is our fault. And in fact, the truth is that it is been caused by a relatively small group of people who are actually the only ones in a position to directly address it meaningfully right now and refuse to do so.
And it comes down to dollars.
It comes down to dollars. It all does. And that can make a person feel helpless and hopeless. That was how I was feeling.
Follow the money.
Yeah, that I can't affect a meaningful change, and I can't get the people who can to do it either. The political process has become corrupted. We don't even have that really anymore to depend on. So it's so easy to fall into despair. And interestingly, they call them doomers. That is another way, I call them the new climate deniers, the doomers, who say, you're right, it is too late, so just consume as much as you can, because it doesn't matter. which we have to be on guard against, because that is a tactic to keep us hopeless. So I'm trying to find some way to process this feeling, because I care so deeply about it.
There is hope.
Yes.
Actually, there is hope. I was shocked and really upset the other day when I saw that the president had bought for $1 billion the rights that the company was doing, or two companies were doing, to the
Windmills.
offshore,
Yes.
really, windmills.
Wind turbines, yeah.
And they're doing the same thing to other areas.
So where do you find hope, Alan?
Pardon?
Where do you find hope?
Sometimes it's really difficult to find hope. It really is. Certainly, until this administration is gone, and I don't want to get political, but I just hope we survive it. And
You and I depended for many, many years, and so did Ashley, and so do many, many people. We depended on the immutability of fact. That fact, compared to opinion, or a contrary point of view that interfered with factual matter, that facts would always be preeminent. They would always rise to the top. But with the advent of social media and the confusion and the cacophony of voices out there, it is very hard in a way of critical thinking to discern what is a fact.
especially in this AI world.
Yes. And so it takes people like Ashley to identify what is factually true, then create stories around the fact that people can read and say, I never thought of it that way. Yes, that factual material is important. And so journalism suffers from this. There are examples, and not to be political, but there, President of the United States recently was getting on Marine One on the South Lawn of the White House, and had just passed some executive orders that took climate change out of all of the documentation on the government websites. When asked by a reporter, why did you do that? He said, climate change is a hoax. All right?
We've been hearing that for 20, 30 years now.
But what so bothered me was there wasn't a follow-up question. It just went on to another series of questions. The follow-up question would have been this: Sir, how do you know that? What is the factual basis for the statement you just made that climate change is a hoax?
And that's one of the real problems, by the way. If I had asked that question, I wouldn't have said "sir" first. But,
I have an awe of rank, however.
but the journalists who were following, certainly the White House today, and in many aspects other than the White House, don't ask the questions. Don't ask the cutting-edge questions that get to the fact.
Well, I have an answer for that, or at least a response to that. They're afraid.
That's right.
They're afraid to ask the follow-up question because they know that they will be criticized and then they will be not part of the White House press corps. That's the way that administration operates. It's the way other people in power and authoritarians have operated. Is they punish people for asking anything that might expose their deceit or lies or confusion.
And it's very, very frightening. But you ask hope. Well, tomorrow we have 3,100 rallies around the world called No Kings.
Yes.
And in that, I see hope, because there are going to be millions of people out there expressing really hope and feelings. We saw it here in Minneapolis not so long ago when we had the infusion of ice all over and 2 people lost their lives. A bunch of others were really injured severely. And Minnesotans came together in a way that I have never seen in a group as large as we had, where they really stood up. That to me is hope, and I hope that that really transfers out to this entire nation,
Well,
because
the world
that's
was
the only
watching,
chance we have.
The world was watching Minnesota, Minneapolis in particular, and took lessons from that people do have the power to change things. I refer to what we saw last month as the great undoing. That's how it is done. That is how you undo the wrongs, by standing up, being present. And that's why Ashley's work is so important, I think, to me, because she is standing up against the fossil fuel combines. Her voice is being used to stand up against people who are wronging this paradise, who are doing terrible damage to the future, all for money. All for money.
It really is. That expression goes back about 4 decades, but follow the money.
Follow the money.
And it really is scary.
Yeah.
Now, I just wanted to tell you that I have a gopher in my pants, and his name is Carlos.
You're never going to outrun that one.
No. That was a great moment on David Letterman's show. And I got a nice note from Letterman after that performance. And he said, and I'm quoting, "That was the funniest show I have ever done." Because Amelia and I were cut into his show 4 different times. And and there was a wonderful thing at the very end of the show. There was a star in the audience, and David Letterman introduced him, camera, picked him out of the audience, and said, "Congratulations, I heard you just had a new baby." And he said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Can you tell me the name?" And he said, "Yes, we've named him Carlos after Don Shelby's gopher."
So do you see hope?
Yes, I see hope in people. I see hope in facts. We're seeing things happening that gives me hope. For instance, the YouTube and Meta just lost an incredibly huge fight.
And very important.
And
they were trials where there were at least one of them with juries.
Yes.
I think both of them had juries,
Right.
as a matter of fact.
And here's where the hope is. They heard facts, that jury. They heard facts and made a decision based on facts. They came to a conclusion that the facts mattered. And the more that happens, the more judges look at facts, the more juries look at facts. It's the third rail of our three-legged stool, if you will. I've mixed metaphors. But I think those people who are assigned to look at facts, the undeniable facts, they're going to save us. My hope is in the judiciary.
We've actually run out of time already, and there's so much more that we could discuss.
You could do 3 shows just with Ashley.
Well, maybe we should do an Access to Democracy show with the two of you. It's been a real pleasure. Ashley and Don Shelby, we didn't get a lot of chance to talk about books, but writers certainly spread out over the whole panoply of everything. So
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you,
in.
Alan.
Thank you so
again.
much. We appreciate being here.